standards, use a totally inadequate amount of energy, including 3 billion people who use less electricity than one of our refrigerators does. So in a world that is so energy deprived, and then you learn, hey, fossil fuels provide 80% of that energy, and they're still growing, particularly in the parts of the world that care most about low-cost, reliable energy, it should seem insane or close to insane to talk about phasing them out rapidly. That should be viewed as you have an enormous burden of proof. So I think of it as the other side has an enormous burden of proof that we should be phasing these things out when the value they provide is so needed, and they're clearly uniquely good at providing it. That's why they're still growing.
Alex, my favorite part of the book is part 4. And
Part 4 or chapter 4?
I'm sorry, part 4.
Part 4.
When we talk about framing the debate, and as I was reading it, I thought this could apply to so many other political issues in our country. So just talk about the anti-impact framework for one, for starters, and then how you suggest we address it with your arguing to 100 and some of the other concepts you present in part 4. Because I think people who are generally more skeptical of government would benefit enormously just from thinking about this in a broader political sense.
Sure. So let's start with this idea of arguing to 100, and I think the easiest example to understand, although it's controversial, you're not supposed to use controversial examples to make new points, I use the example of Trump's election, and it's not to endorse or condemn it, it's just to show the dynamics. So when I talk about arguing to 100, so I think of every debate as involving like a moral good and a moral evil. So you can think of it as, like, I call it the good 100 and the evil negative 100. And you can think of, say, the election or the American political discussion coming into before Trump's election as 100 was more inequality and negative 100, or rather 100 was equality and negative 100 was increasing inequality. So it's all about equality. Now, trying to argue for his policies on that framework, so we need all renewables, we need these support investments and taxes, etc. And then the other side will say, oh no, so they're trying to say this is bringing us to 100, and then the other side says, no, it's impractical, it'll cost too much, or they'll make fun of it or something. But I call this arguing to 0, because if the other side proposes positive things and you just shoot them down, your best case scenario is 0, right? You don't move at all. And so I think what I've done in energy is I've rejected this framing. I've rejected this framing of our goal is to eliminate CO2 emissions, eliminate fossil fuels, and as I talk about in the book, I reject the deeper goal underlying that, which is that our goal should be to eliminate human impact on the Earth. And I frame it most broadly in terms of our goal should be advancing human flourishing on Earth, and we should be making, when we're thinking about global issues, that should be the goal, and we should be thinking of it that way. And then, the negative 100 is increasing human suffering on Earth. And once you frame it that way, then people are very open to the possibility that more fossil fuels could do that, because you can say, well, if you look carefully at the benefits and side effects, we need more of them. So the lesson, because I know you're interested in how other pro-liberty people do it, is you need a positive goal and you need a policy to get these policy of energy. And what we're going to do is
did, that you were saying, among other things, that it's not so much that the experts are wrong on the narrow area of their expertise. It's just that the chain through which that gets communicated to the public, there's lots of links in those chains, in that chain, that where distortion enters. And just one, I'm not sure if this was on your radar, Alex, but William Nordhaus won the Nobel Prize, for his work on the economics of climate change. He's arguably the top economist in this area in the world. His own model shows that the 1.5C cap on global warming would be so destructive, it would be better if governments did nothing. And yet, when they were interviewing him right after he won the Nobel Prize, the same weekend that the Nobel Prize for him was announced, the UN came out with its special report on 1.5C of warming, and a New York Times reporter asked him, Professor Nordhaus, do we still have time to halt warming at 1.5C? And he just said, no, I think at this point it's too late. And he didn't add, and thank goodness, because that would be catastrophic. He just left it at that. So that's part of it, to show people the dichotomy between what the actual literature says and how the media is communicating it to people.
So you guys have picked up on kind of two of the, what I would say, innovations are in the book, or some new concepts. So, in clarifying this issue of fossil fuels, how to think about it, and then how to explain it to others, there's some things where I just need to develop new ideas or new ways of thinking about things. And so there's Argument 200, and then the idea Bob is referring to, I use the term knowledge system throughout the book. And this is to capture that when we are told what expert conclusions, including conclusions about what to do, are, we need to recognize that we don't just get those conclusions automatically from the expert researchers in the field. There's a process by which what those researchers find is synthesized, disseminated, and then evaluated in terms of leading to action. And I show that basically at every stage of this process, there are big distortions. So just in terms of evaluation, what I point out in chapter 1 is that we just are so many of these expert conclusions that we're taught, particularly we should rapidly eliminate fossil fuels, ignore the huge benefits of fossil fuels. And so I use the example of Michael Mann, one of our leading, what I call designated experts on this issue, and he has a whole book about fossil fuels and talks about fossil fuels in agriculture, but only talks about negatives, or alleged negatives. He doesn't talk about the fact that the whole world would starve without fossil fuels or their equivalent, and there's no reason to believe their agricultural functions, including fertilizer, can be replaced in any way. And this kind of thinking, non-thinking, is what leads us to an energy crisis like today, fertilizer crisis, because people like Michael Mann, because we should make decisions on this issue all of our own benefits. And then in terms of disseminators, this is almost one thing. The IPCC comes up with its reports and it gets destroyed by results, but also by the the track record is, it has often been 180 degrees. That is, they've recommended policies that would have ended millions of lives prematurely.
Right, and related to that, sort of circumspects what Jeff was saying too about approaching this from a philosophical background. And was it Barbara Boxer that was sort of poking fun at you?
Yes.
You had that anecdote in there. But it was that somebody who's an expert on how much CO2 in the atmosphere can retain. Somebody comes in and who's really good at knowing the current state of knowledge about what increases in CO2 concentration would mean in terms of how much warmer the planet will be in the year 2100, even though that's a very dubious thing that we really don't know much about. That's a very complex process. But even someone who's an expert on that does not mean that they know, therefore, so the optimal
your ability to master it. One point about mastery people don't get is they sometimes get we can neutralize negatives, but actually what is negative climate-wise depends on your degree of mastery. So I love snowboarding and snowboarding, so I go to snowboard in Utah and do those things. So that snow used to be a negative, right? That was a threat. But thanks to mastery, that's a prized, now expensive positive. And you can take the same for like tropical conditions where I live in Laguna Beach. Like now that's considered a total positive to live there, but with less mastery, it would not be nearly as positive. So, let alone Florida. I mean, everyone's moving to Florida and Texas because some of the negatives there become substantially positive because you have things like air conditioning that can then the worst aspects of it indoors. But in general, you get this one brand sometimes.
Alex, I think your description of our political system is alarming to me because it affected the we need synthesizers. So I was very confident. What do epidemiologists say here? Virologists say they might have a kind of specific type of questions to knowledge. But that doesn't mean that they are equipped to determine, let's say, trade-offs for society at large for shutting down businesses in response to COVID. And I think you are very much the synthesizer here. And I think the idea that we don't need philosophers or an understanding of the framework behind the questions and answers here is really dangerous.
Yeah, I think COVID is a great example, and I bring it up a bit in chapter 1. But if you think about, with COVID, you have this very clear thing where the experts say we have to lock down, and then if you dispute that, well, then you're against the experts, and you're claiming that you know all this stuff. And I think one thing that happens is sometimes the pro-freedom people will too easily jump on a certain contrarian position in terms of the content of the issues, because that seems to protect freedom. So some people, I think, would underestimate the severity of COVID because they felt like, well, otherwise we can't have freedom.